Hello again, I am Blunty, sticking with the Switch-related content because you folks seem to be responding quite strongly to it. But today, instead of reviews and previews and editorial and expectations, I wanted to focus on something else a few of you have asked about. Given that we're expecting Gamecube Games to see life again on the Switch's virtual console, what games would I hope to see there to get a fresh gasp of fresh air and to be exposed to gamers too young to have been there when they were new? Now, this list is all about what my best memories of being a GameCube owner are all about, not necessarily what I'm actually expecting from the Switch Virtual Console when it comes to GameCube titles, but a man can hope. First up to bat, of course, as a Poké veteran for almost as long as there's been Pokemon Colosseum. Back in 2004, or I guess 2003 as we led up to the 2004 release, we were ecstatic at the concept of this game. The first Pokemon RPG to be on a home console with all the fancy 3D models and such. Before now, of course, we had the Nintendo 64 Pokemon Stadium games, but they were purely about battling. Now we were getting an actual adventure, a protagonist, antagonists, a world filled with NPCs and items and Pokemon to catch and raise. Now, we didn't really actually get what we hoped for, and in fact to this day we still haven't got a full and proper Pokemon RPG on a home console. Pokemon Colosseum was still pretty good, even if it did let us down by being a tightly on-rails experience with little to none of the side-questing, exploring, or breadth of scope of even the most basic of the Game Boy line RPGs. And there were no wild Pokemon to catch. Instead, there was a small selection of Pokemon the antagonists were using, Shadow Pokemon, whose whole MacGuffin was that they were basically infected by evil, so you had to battle them, steal them using a special snatch ball, and then work to purify their spirits. An interesting twist to the usual formula, but no doubt poker fans were let down by the limited selection and the utter lack of random wild battles. It's a Pokemon RPG light at best, but it was still pretty compelling and a must-play. Its follow-up game, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, ran along the same tracks, a very on-rails experience battling Shadow Pokemon. It was expanded in most ways, usually quite pleasantly, including looking a whole bunch better. Most battles were double battles this time around, and there were even a few wild Pokemon, but you could only find them in very specific locations called Pokespots, and there wasn't many to choose from. The story was slightly more sophisticated, there was more NPC interaction, but again, while it was a pretty good experience, it wasn't quite what we'd hoped for, which was of course simply a more open RPG like the portable games were, only with a much more sophisticated presentation. But both Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness are experiences I would welcome back, and it's not too hard to imagine these games arriving in concert with whatever brand new Pokemon game Game Freak have already confirmed they're working on for the Switch. Most are running with the rumour it'll be something they're calling Pokemon Stars, which would be an expanded third-tier game to follow on directly from Pokemon Sun and Moon. But there is of course a chance it could be something like the GameCube games with some kind of new twist or gimmick to keep it separate from the main line. Either way, Gale of Darkness and Colosseum would be a fantastic addition to the Virtual Console, as there's quite a lot of Pokemon kids fresher to the games than OG lab-coated Pokemon professors like me, kids who have never experienced games like these. One of my personal favourites from the GameCube is Mario Kart Double Dash. In fact, I'd be prepared to call it my favourite Mario Kart game. The tracks were great, they looked great, it played great, very smooth, but it's the gimmick of having 2 races per kart that really made it interesting. Not only could you switch rider and driver at will, which means you can collect 2 pickups at once, something I've noticed they're bringing back in the Switch version of Mario Kart 8, but apparently without the partner rider. What made it really cool though was that there were special weapons and abilities exclusive to certain characters, so your choice of driver and rider had an even larger impact on your racing style than ever before. And I have very fond memories of 4-player Grand Prix from back in the day. I had a massive rear projection TV at home, my mates would come around and we'd just have a goddamn blast. I also spent a lot of time in single-player modes. I'd be very happy to have this game amongst my Virtual Console collection. And this is actually one of the games I'm expecting we probably will see. Moving on to Soul Calibur 2 now though, a series I had to that point had little experience with outside of the occasional go at the Soul Calibur arcade game at my local cinema, itself preceded by Soul Edge. Soul Calibur 2 was an arcade port which was available on the PlayStation 2, the Xbox, and of course the Gamecube. Each separate version, though, had its own platform-exclusive character from outside the Soul series. On the PS2, it was Heihachi from Tekken, which was awesome. On the Xbox, it was comic book character Spawn, which was dumb, and the only reason it was there is because Spawn's creator Todd McFarlane had also created a brand new character for the console release, which was also a dumb character. But the best one was for the GameCube. It was Link from Legend of Zelda, which, considering Soul Calibur was a fighting game revolving around the use of various weapons, Link's sword and shield was a far more perfect fit for the game than even Tekken's Heihachi, let alone Spawn. I loved it. It was critically acclaimed as one of the best fighting games around, and between being a superb game and featuring fan-favourite Link as an exclusive character, and being the type of fighting game that generally discouraged button mashing, I loved it. It was in fact one of the best-selling third-party games on the GameCube. Now, I don't think it's very likely we'll ever see this on Virtual Console. Bandai Namco hasn't shown any interest in the property in a very long time, and hasn't made a Soul Calibur game at all since 2007's Soul Calibur Legends, which did not sell very well at all. But this version of the game, of course, does have Link, star of the flagship title for the Switch launch. And it was, as I said, one of the best-selling third-party games on the GameCube, so who knows? Maybe all the stars will align and we'll get lucky. A man can hope. It is, after all, a tale of souls and swords eternally retold.
World, a tale of souls and swords eternally retold.
Super Mario Sunshine is a no-brainer, really. Pretty much guaranteed we'll see this at some point. Nintendo love re-releasing old Mario games, and much like the GameCube Pokemon games, it was quite unusual when compared to its other family members. I actually never played much of this. I purchased a copy, sure, but my girlfriend at the time basically monopolized it. So I spent far more time watching her play than I did playing myself. She was better at it than I was anyway. The only issue here is that Sunshine, like many GameCube games as a matter of fact, makes heavy and specific use of the analog triggers. Squeeze a little and you squirt a little, and you can run around while squirting. Giggity. Pull all the way in and you lock yourself in place for a more powerful attack you can direct from a single spot. The reason this intrinsic mechanic is a problem for the Switch, though, is the Switch does not have analog triggers. And without some kind of way around this, it would basically make this game utterly unplayable on a Switch Virtual Console version. It's not an unsolvable problem, but it is a stop-dead roadblock without changing the game's control scheme somehow, because it is a mechanic that is baked hardcore into the very heart of this game. There were two Simpsons games that I loved on the GameCube too. This was of course at the height of Simpsons merchandising. But while almost all movie tie-in games of the era were complete garbage, the two Simpsons games, both of them driving based in fact, were pretty great. The Simpsons Hit and Run was basically easiest to describe as a kind of kid-friendly parody of Grand Theft Auto 3. It was an action-adventure sandbox-style game with a mix of walking and driving activities and missions, complete with a GTA-style radar and wanted system if you get too destructive. There's tons of collectibles of various types, and gameplay that leans heavily on driving like a complete lunatic, and it was damn fun. And much like GTA 3 itself was, makes a great drop-in, drop-out game you can play for as little or as long as you like. It's perfect for that. But before that game came out, there was my favourite of the two, Simpsons Road Rage. And it too was also something of a parody of a then popular game, Crazy Taxi. The core mechanic being you drive around and pick up passengers and then deliver them to their destination in the fastest time possible, which, amongst other things, meant you had to look for shortcuts and way across the map and stuff like that. The driving controls on this game were much, much worse than Hit and Run, but in my opinion it was more enjoyable because of it. The crazy, hectic pace was exciting. The dialogue quips from the original cast, though they would get repetitive, were classic Simpsons. And the sense of speed and being barely in control at all times was just pure, distilled, classic arcadey fun. There's also a bunch of unlockable driver characters, and the challenge could get pretty wild. Fun fact though, while most call it a parody or even tribute to Crazy Taxi, Sega, the publishers of Crazy Taxi, disagreed. They thought it was less of a parody or tribute and more of a complete rip-off, and in fact sued Fox Interactive, Electronic Arts and Radical Entertainment for patent infringement. A case that was quietly settled out of court, by the way. Now, with Electronic Arts as the publisher and EA's love of milking any and all franchises they have for as long as possible, the possibility of seeing this game on Switch Virtual Console, well, it's not impossible, but perhaps improbable. Road Rage is not as deep or as complex as Hit and Run, and it was reviewed more poorly if I remember correctly, and it did tend to chug pretty bad in places with lots of traffic. But of the two Simpsons games, this is the one I played more. For all its faults, it was still a lot of mindless fun. Back to GameCube exclusives now though, and indeed first party published, Paper Mario The ThousandYear Door, a game I have never actually played more than an hour or so of at a mate's place once. It is a sequel to the N64 game of similar name, and always somewhat lamented not doing so. Its beautiful, crisp presentation and shifting the traditional platforming characters over to a turn-based RPG was very intriguing to me. Known as Mario Story 2, or Paper Mario 2 in some regions, Paper Mario The ThousandYear Door, I remember, was criticised for not taking enough of a step forward from the N64 version. But nonetheless, I was always mildly attracted to its interesting presentation gimmick of paper cutout style characters, which besides being visually pleasant, was actually folded into the game mechanics itself. It also had a bright and fun sense of humour, which I appreciated. I can't actually tell you exactly why I never got around to playing it, but every time it has come up in conversation ever since those days, I have thought to myself, I need to get around to that someday, but I never really did. An appearance on the Virtual Console, though, could be just the prod I need to give it a legit go. Then there was Buffy the Vampire Slayer Chaos Bleeds. And there's pretty much no way in hell, see what it did there, that this will appear on the Virtual Console, but I'm popping it in this list because I have some vivid memories of it on my GameCube. Frankly, it was mechanically a pretty average game. I remember not liking the controls much at all, and while playing a bit on an emulator preparing this footage, I realised how dated the combat mechanics are by today's standards. But mainly, it was just awesome role-playing as Buffy, one of my all-time favourite TV heroes and indeed series. Some of the voice acting, well, actually I should say some of the voice directing, because I know the actors are better than this, was fairly tragic. The MacGuffin in this game was that there was a bunch of alternate realities bleeding into Buffy's, which meant they had a window to bring back previously defeated enemies and evil versions of allies, which was fun. It even had a few multiplayer modes, like one that had you collecting bunnies, a reference any true Buffy fan should giggle at. The GameCube version of this game actually had better reviews than the Xbox and PS2 ports. I don't remember why exactly, but I do remember specifically feeling a little self-satisfaction knowing that I had selected the best version of the game. Although the GameCube being what it was at the time, far fewer people actually owned one, so the PS2 version, which many more people owned, outsold the GameCube version by a very wide margin. But yeah, you know what, after recording this footage for this video, I think it's better to leave this one in the pleasant memories pile rather than trying to relive it on the Virtual Console. It doesn't stand up that well. Oh, and there was also the Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction. Set in an open-world action-adventure style. You could move around freely pretty much in any way you liked, even scramble across walls, climb, or even run up buildings. You feel much more powerful in this Hulk game than you did in many Hulk games. And I don't know too many things more fun than picking up a car, ripping it in half, and making gigantic metal boxing gloves out of them. When it came to the storyline and missions, well, it was all fairly standard stuff, and not especially memorable, but the story and the cutscenes were a step above what was common for this type of game in the day. But what was memorable was just careening around the city, smashing everything to crap, throwing buses at attack helicopters, punching policemen with family sedans, and hurling members of the general public across several city blocks as they scream into the distance. Woo! It was about as good as a game about being a mindless, fury-fueled monster as you could have possibly hoped for. Combat flowed incredibly well, especially for a game of this era. I must have spent dozens of hours just leaping around the buildings, idly obliterating anything in my way until I had done enough damage to trigger an aggressive military response for the sheer joy of hurling torn-up police cars at hapless soldiers. In fact, come to think of it, I don't think I ever actually finished the story mode. I was just happy smashing things up. It is, of course, another game I'm sure we'll probably never see on the Virtual Console. It wasn't a platform exclusive, of course, and the Hulk really isn't a property anyone is pushing right now. The game wasn't even related to either of the Hulk movies of that era. It was just a standalone entity. In fact, it was written by Paul Jenkins, who had recently, at the time, done a rather well-received 20-issue run on the Incredible Hulk comic book, where he explored the psychology of Bruce Banner and multiple personality disorder. So while I'm sure it'll never come to the VC, it is another one I would wish for because it is a bunch of fun. By the way, if you do go looking for it, do not confuse it with the GameCube game simply called Hulk. That is an entirely different game, a spin-off tied to the first Hulk movie by Ang Lee. And the game is, it's pretty crap. I mean, it's still a bit of fun to run around and smash stuff, but it's not nearly as awesome or as fun as Ultimate Destruction is. So yeah, those were a few of my standout memories from my GameCube days. Maybe half of these will actually have any chance of seeing a Virtual Console release, but as I said in the opening, this was more about what my best memories of the GameCube were and what I'd personally hope for on the Switch's GameCube Virtual Console. There are, of course, many more absolutely classic GameCube games out there, all sort of lots of very obvious choices, particularly most, if not all, of the first-party GameCube games. And I'm sure if you search for it right now, you'd probably find a list of, the 20 best-selling games on the GameCube that someone has slapped together in a list similar to this one, but without any thought or joy behind it. I am at least certain we'll see Mario Sunshine and Mario Kart Double Dash on the Virtual Console, and, I'll be happy enough with those two. But of the other ones here with slender chances, I think I'd want Soul Calibur 2 the most. It'd be real nice to have an absolutely classic fighting game up on the system. And again, it's got Link in it, so, there's a slight bit of impetus there for Nintendo to pay attention to it, I suppose. And again, it was one of the best-selling third-party titles for the GameCube, so who knows. Anyway, thanks for watching. I am Blunty. We'll catch you next time. I'm sure you have done by now, but I invite you to drop down into the comment section and share your best memories from your GameCube days, if you were there. And if you weren't there, what do you think you missed out on? What would you like to see on the Virtual Console so you actually get a chance to dive into that game? I mean, there was Pokemon Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness, but I only ever played XD Gale of Darkness once, where I played Colosseum a couple of times, so heavy preference for XD there. Anyway, catch you next time.